I truly believed in the California dream I built with my husband, Michael, until the shadow of his first love, a woman named Evelyn, repeatedly intruded on our marriage. His habitual slighting prioritizing that ghost over the living bond we shared shattered my heart. Upon discovering the depth of his emotional and financial betrayal, I silently walked away, not in defeat, but to plan an architecturally precise, cold calculated revenge. Driven by a cinematic irony and an empowered quest for agency, I began a secret mission that utilized his own regret as the sharpest weapon, culminating in a quiet, undeniable victory where I reclaimed not just my life, but his position. California is where dreams go to die. Or perhaps, where they are meticulously dissected, piece by glorious, painful piece. For a long time, I thought the dream belonged to me. A sprawling house in the hills, the scent of jasmine on a perpetual evening breeze, and Michael, my Michael, we met in a whirl of perfect logic, like two mathematical equations finally solving for the same elegant answer. He was the anchor I never knew I needed, stable, charming, ambitious, and for me he was everything. I loved him with a devotion that, looking back, was entirely too pure, entirely too blind. It was the kind of love that saw a man, not a history, a future, not a ghost. I remember our wedding day. The golden sunlight hitting the Pacific coast, making the water look like scattered diamonds. Michael looked at me, and in his eyes I saw eternity. Or at least I thought I did. I saw a man finally finding his home. I saw us. What I failed to see, what my love conveniently painted over, was the faint, almost imperceptible shadow lurking in the periphery of his gaze. A shadow named Evelyn, Evelyn. The mythical first love. The one who got away. The one who, Michael would occasionally sigh, defined him. I was the present, the wife, the bedrock. She was the poetry, the wistful memory, the unachievable standard. I used to dismiss her, as one dismisses a childhood scar, visible but irrelevant to the current body. The problem with a ghost is that it doesn't need a body to take up space. It only needs a devoted memory. And Michael, my pragmatic, logical husband, had a memory like a vault when it came to her. The first crack wasn't a fight. It was a silence, a specific, heavy silence that would fall over him whenever a certain song played on the radio, or when we drove past a particular unassuming coffee shop downtown. It wasn't about the places, I realized. It was about the way his face would subtly shift, a quiet, involuntary tribute to a time I wasn't a part of. It felt like I was standing in a room, and he was staring through the wall, into another life. One evening, we were scrolling through old photo albums, curating pictures for a new frame, happy moments. Our moments. Then he stopped. A photograph of him, younger, almost painfully earnest, standing next to a girl with bright, reckless eyes, Evelyn. He didn't just look at it. He held it, his thumb lightly tracing her faded outline. She was. He started, then stopped. She was the reason I learned what love was, Tina. I smiled. A tight, brittle thing that felt like glass shattering behind my teeth. And I'm the reason you learned what marriage is, darling? I tried to make it light, a playful jab. He didn't laugh. He simply placed the photo back, his gaze distant. Your safety, he said. Safety. That one word. It was a compliment dressed in chainmail. It meant I was the harbor, not the storm. It meant I was reliable, not essential. I was the second act, the predictable resolution to his grand, messy, unwritten prologue. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply observed. That's the first lesson in the art of cold, calculated survival. Observe the enemy, especially when the enemy thinks you're just a landscape. The subtle slights began to accumulate, not as accusations but as artifacts of a competing loyalty. A dinner reservation cancelled because he ran into a mutual friend of Evelyn's and spent the evening discussing old times. A trip to a gallery because it featured an artist she admired. He wasn't cheating, not physically. He was doing something far worse. He was allowing the ghost of a past love to constantly, casually, overshadow the reality of his present marriage. He was building an altar to a memory and leaving me to tend the fire. I started timing the frequency of the mentions. I started noticing the almost defensive way he would talk about her, always emphasizing her impact on his character. It was as if he needed my acknowledgement of her significance to validate his own identity. I should have screamed. I should have thrown things. But a strange calm descended on me. The calm of a surgeon before an impossible operation. I was starting to see the blueprint of our lives, and in it I was a beautiful, functional addition, but never the foundation. The house, the jasmine, the rings, it all began to feel less like a dream and more like a carefully constructed golden cage. A cage I was now determined to dismantle, piece by piece, from the inside out. But I had to wait for the final, undeniable proof. The one slight that would make my departure a cinematic moment, not a tearful exit. If you've ever felt like you were a second choice, a safe haven, or a replacement for a ghost, you understand the silent rage that boils beneath a calm exterior. Don't let my story become just another missed connection in your feed. Subscribe now, before the algorithms decide you're not worth showing the truth to, and if you're still debating, go ahead. Comment why you won't subscribe. I'd love to know what fear is holding you back from witnessing this kind of transformation. The truth is, I was already gone. I was just waiting for Michael to hand me the key to the cage. And he would. Soon. He always did. He just didn't realize he was dealing with a mind that had already moved on from love and was focused solely on leverage. They say the small things kill a marriage. They're wrong. The small things don't kill it. They define the manner of death. They provide the slow, agonizing poison, ensuring the victim understands exactly what is happening. We had planned a weekend trip to Napa Valley. A grand gesture on Michael's part, or so I thought. He booked a stunning winery retreat. I packed my best dresses. Everything was perfect, until the Thursday before, when he came home late, his face a mask of weary self-importance. "The trip is off, Tina," he said, not meeting my eyes. He was already loosening his tie, a shield of work-related stress surrounding him. I kept my voice even. "What happened? The merger?" "No, it's Evelyn's mother." The name landed in the room like a heavy stone. Evelyn's mother. A woman I had met once, politely, at a charity event, a woman who had barely acknowledged my existence. "Her mother is ill," he explained, running a hand through his hair. "She needs someone to handle the logistics of moving her into assisted living here in California. Evelyn is overwhelmed." I offered to help. I stood there, holding a freshly laundered weekend shirt of his. He offered to help. He offered to cancel our special anniversary trip, a trip to celebrate us, to play personal assistant and emotional support to the mother of his first love, simply because the actual daughter was overwhelmed. "Michael," I began, my voice dangerously low. "Evelyn is a grown woman. She has a family. Why are you the one canceling our plans for her family?" He finally looked at me, and his eyes held the weary indignation of a martyr. "Because, Tina, I owe her. She was always there for me. It's about loyalty. It's about being a decent human being. Loyalty, decency." The irony was so thick it was suffocating. He defined these noble traits as obligations to a woman who wasn't his wife, but considered them optional extras for the one who was. I walked over to the suitcase I had packed so optimistically. I slowly, deliberately began to unpack. Each folded shirt, each neatly tucked piece of lingerie, felt like a silent, devastating critique of my position in his life. I was always the one who could be safely rescheduled, safely disappointed. I was the reliable comfort blanket, easily tossed aside when a dramatic, high-stakes emergency required his unique attention. "And what if I said no?" I asked. "What if I said we're going to Napa, and Evelyn needs to handle her own mother?" He sighed, a loud, theatrical noise. "Then you would be putting your wants ahead of someone else's true need, Tina. I thought you were better than that." That was the line. The subtle, yet seismic shift. He wasn't just prioritizing her. He was morally judging me for questioning his choice. My heartbreak transformed into a cold, hard ember. He thought I was better than that. Fine. I would show him exactly what I was better at. "Go, Michael," I said, putting the last folded shirt back in the drawer. My tone was utterly devoid of emotion. "Go be the decent man. I'll keep the house warm." He relaxed immediately. Relief flooded his face, and in that moment of self-satisfaction, he didn't notice the icy detachment in my eyes. He saw capitulation. He saw the safe, predictable Tina. He didn't see the woman who had just signed her own emotional divorce papers. He left the next morning, bright and early, armed with legal pads and a compassionate aura. He was a hero in his own narrative, rushing to the aid of a distressed damsel and her ailing mother. He was gone for 3 days. 3 days where the silence in the California house was so profound it was almost musical. I didn't call. I didn't text. I spent those 72 hours in a state of hyper-awareness. I didn't weep. I planned. I went through our joint finances, meticulously noting every asset, every liability, every investment. I read all the fine print on the marital agreements. I was compiling a brief, not a resignation letter. I realized that what I wanted wasn't the satisfaction of a screaming match or a messy public confrontation. I wanted something clean. Something surgical. I wanted him to regret his choices, not because I was gone, but because I had become a calculated, impossible absence. I wanted to teach him a lesson in value. You don't appreciate what you have until its absence is more valuable than its presence. When he returned, he was tired but exultant. He had done a good deed. He was a hero. He kissed me, distracted, and mumbled, "Thanks for being so understanding, T. Anytime, Michael," I replied, my voice sweet. It was the last genuinely kind thing I ever said to him. Because by then, I was no longer his wife. I was merely a temporary resident, conducting reconnaissance before a highly sensitive extraction operation. The silent war had begun. The mind, when truly broken by betrayal, stops seeking comfort and starts seeking data. It transforms from a heart into a highly sophisticated surveillance system. My mission: find the undeniable truth that would justify the cold, calculated path I knew I had to take. I knew Michael's professional life inside and out. His firm was his lifeblood. He was a partner in a high-end real estate and investment group. He was brilliant, ruthless in business, and utterly sentimental in his personal life, a fatal combination. My search began not in his phone, but in his tax documents. The truly calculating person leaves breadcrumbs in the most professional, boring places. I spent my days, while he was at work, immersed in spreadsheets and legal jargon. It was tedious, suffocating work, but every number was a clue. Then, I found it. A series of small, intermittent, but consistent wire transfers. Not huge sums that would immediately trigger an audit, but respectable, steady deposits. Over the past 3 years since Evelyn had moved back to California, these payments totaled close to $150,000. The recipient's name was redacted for security, but the account number led to a mid-level investment brokerage. I needed the name. This required a level of transgression I hadn't yet crossed. But the principle of the matter was too loud to ignore. He was financially supporting his first love while telling me he couldn't afford the time off work. I accessed his email, a simple password I had known for years: Evelyn's dog's name, followed by the year they met. It was a cliché betrayal that almost made me laugh in its pathetic predictability. There, buried deep in an archive folder labeled Old Clients, were the receipts. A dozen emails confirming the wire transfers, all addressed to a property management company linked directly to an apartment lease for Evelyn. He wasn't just helping her mother move. He was helping Evelyn live. He was paying her rent, funding her lifestyle, all while assuring me our joint savings were tight due to the market. It wasn't just emotional infidelity. It was financial infidelity. He wasn't simply reminiscing. He was maintaining a relationship, a masked bond that was costing me, his wife, tangibly and irrevocably. The $150,000 wasn't just money. It was the deposit on the new life I had wanted to start, the security blanket I thought we shared, now siphoned off to keep the ghost comfortable. The betrayal was total. It was strategic. And suddenly, the rage I had suppressed for so long crystallized into something infinitely sharper. The desire for perfect symmetry. I wanted him to lose exactly what he had valued most by prioritizing her: stability, respect, and control. I didn't confront him. A confrontation is an opportunity for denial, for lies, for emotional manipulation. I didn't want the truth. I had the truth. I wanted the weaponization of that truth. I drafted an email to myself, a sterile, bulleted list of the transactions, the dates, and the purpose. I encrypted it and backed it up on a secure, untraceable cloud service. Evidence: my silent insurance policy. The next evening, Michael came home, exhausted but content. He was talking about a major deal he was closing, his focus entirely on the future of his firm. "You've been quiet, T," he noted, finally noticing my presence over his steak. "Thinking," I said simply. "About what the next 5 years look like." He beamed. "Us in a bigger house, perhaps. Maybe a small beach place. The firm is booming, Tina. We're solid. Solid. The word echoed the safety he had assigned me. I smiled back, a genuine, unsettling smile. Yes, Michael. We are very solid. And I intend to make sure we stay that way. From my perspective, he completely missed the subtle menace in the last 3 words. He saw a supportive wife. I saw a silent partner preparing a hostile takeover of her own life. I had the ledger of betrayal. Now, I needed the escape route. The time for heartbreak was over. The era of cold, calculated revenge had begun. I opened my laptop to begin drafting a completely separate set of documents related to a long-forgotten inheritance from my grandmother. A small, but significant financial asset he didn't know the true value of. It was my secret weapon. It was my foundation. The final step before the quiet, empowered exit. The silence was my greatest ally. Michael saw it as acceptance. I used it as insulation. I was observing him now with the detachment of a scientist watching a specimen in a jar. Every move he made was a data point confirming the necessity of my trajectory. The deeper I dug into his financial support of Evelyn, the more insidious the pattern became. It wasn't just rent. It was payments for a specialist art course she was taking, subscription fees for a niche industry journal. Even a retainer for a minor legal issue she faced years ago, still listed on his business credit card statement. He wasn't merely nostalgic. He was financially invested in preserving Evelyn's potential, her comfort, her very existence in California. It was an invisible, costly second marriage that I was subsidizing. I began to dress differently. Not for him, but for the performance. Sharper, colder lines, designer pieces that spoke of power and independence, not domestic comfort. Michael loved it. He saw it as me finally embracing my own ambition. He was utterly blind to the fact that my ambition had narrowed to a single, devastating target, him. One Saturday, Michael announced he had to drive downtown to meet a contractor about an investment property. A routine business errand. He even kissed me goodbye, a preoccupied peck on the forehead. But the detail was wrong. I had just reviewed his portfolio. The downtown property wasn't due for contractor bids for another 6 weeks. It was a lie built on half-truth, the most dangerous kind. I didn't panic. I didn't reach for the car keys. I reached for my computer. I used the financial records I had gathered to locate Evelyn's apartment. It was a stylish, upscale loft in a trendy area fitting. Considering the financial support, I drove there 2 hours later. Not to confront them, never to confront them, but to observe the depth of the deception. The area was bustling, filled with the loud, vibrant life that Michael always claimed was too busy for our quiet life in the hills. I parked across the street and waited. And there they were. Not fighting, not arguing, not even hiding. They were sitting at an outdoor cafe. Evelyn laughing that bright, reckless laugh I'd seen in the old photograph while Michael gazed at her. It wasn't lust. It wasn't secret passion. It was worse. It was comfort. It was a return to a specific younger version of himself that he missed. A version that only she could validate. He reached across the small table and adjusted a loose strand of her hair behind her ear. A gesture so intimate, so casually possessive, that it sliced through the last shred of my belief in our marriage. It wasn't sexual cheating. It was soul cheating. He was giving her the emotional real estate that belonged to me. I sat in the car, utterly still. I watched him gather her things, pay the bill and walk her to her building entrance. They didn't kiss, which was irrelevant. The true betrayal was in the way his shoulders relaxed when he was near her. The way he transformed from the stressed, ambitious husband into a nostalgic, gentle admirer. Then, he got into his car and drove back to our house, back to his life, back to me, the safety. Driving home, the California sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery oranges and violent reds. It should have been a dramatic soundtrack to my breakdown. Instead, I felt only a cold, perfect clarity. I wasn't hurt anymore. I was simply informed. He had chosen the fantasy of the past, the unfulfilled promise of Evelyn, over the complex, lived reality of Tina. He preferred the altar of the ghost to the maintenance of the living bond. I realized then that my revenge couldn't be loud. It had to be about proving to him, surgically, that the safety he took for granted was the only thing that held his carefully constructed life together, and removing it would cause a silent, devastating structural collapse. When I got home, he was already in the kitchen, microwaving leftovers, whistling a tune. He looked up, his expression innocent. "Tough meeting, honey." Lot of back and forth with the contractor. I walked over, kissed him lightly on the cheek, and looked him straight in the eye. "I'm sure you did the best you could." "Michael," I said, my tone flat, almost dismissive. He thought I was being supportive. I was, in fact, delivering a silent verdict, and the execution date was rapidly approaching. The Napa trip cancellation, the secret funding, the stolen emotional hours, those were injuries. What happened next was the amputation. The moment where I understood that I was not just a second choice but a resource to be managed while he pursued his true interest. Michael had a secure safe in his home office, hidden behind a bookshelf. I had always known the combination, but I had never felt the need to open it. Until now. I waited for the night he was out late at a networking dinner. I opened the safe. Inside, along with insurance papers and spare cash, was a manila envelope, heavily sealed. The contents were staggering. Not just proof of the financial transfers I already knew about, but a signed promissory note. The note detailed a large personal loan, nearly $250,000, made by Michael to Evelyn 3 years prior, just after she moved back to California. The stated purpose: to help her start a boutique design firm, a passion she had always dreamt of pursuing. The terms were vaguely defined, the repayment schedule non-existent, and the interest rate 0. This was no small favor. This was the equivalent of him investing heavily in Evelyn's future, using capital that was fundamentally part of our marital wealth, without my knowledge or consent. This wasn't just a slight. It was a fundamental undermining of our financial partnership and my personal security. I realized where the money had come from, a substantial long-term investment we had both agreed upon selling early for market correction. Michael had told me he moved it into a safer, low-yield fund. He had lied. He had liquidated our shared future to fund her individual dream. I photographed every page of the note, the signatures, the dates. I uploaded it to the secure server alongside the wire transfer receipts. The narrative was complete. Michael was not just a wistful husband, he was an active benefactor and silent partner to his first love, while relegating his actual wife to the role of housekeeper and unwitting financier. I sat in his opulent, quiet office, surrounded by the emblems of his success, and a profound, empowering calm washed over me. I wasn't heartbroken anymore. Heartbreak requires vulnerability. I was fortified. I closed the safe. I left everything exactly as I found it. I went to bed, and when Michael finally slipped in beside me around 2 a.m., smelling faintly of expensive scotch, I didn't move. I lay there, feeling the weight of the evidence, the weight of the betrayal, and turning it into solid steel. He regretted Evelyn leaving him all those years ago. He regretted the loss of that youthful, defining love. And to compensate, he was quietly rebuilding her life. This was his great, unforgivable mistake. He focused so much on preserving his past that he failed to notice the bomb he was building in his present. I saw my life not as a tragedy but as a strategic chess match. I was queen, and he had just sacrificed his king for a pawn, Evelyn. It was my move. That night, I started drafting my own private, legal document. The one based on the secret inheritance from my grandmother. It was a trust named simply, the Tina V. Foundation. It was the quiet pivot that would move my assets out of his reach, solidify my independence, and provide the deep financial moat necessary for the upcoming Scorched Earth campaign. I looked at Michael sleeping next to me, his breathing heavy and regular. He was secure in the false belief that I was still his safe haven. He didn't know that the ground beneath his feet was already hollow. He would wake up one day and realize he had sacrificed a $50 million empire for a $250,000 promissory note. But not yet. Not until I was ready. The period following the discovery of the promissory note was the most difficult, not because of the pain, but because of the required theatrical performance. I had to continue playing the loving, supportive wife while inside. I was meticulously building his demolition plan. I withdrew emotionally, but cleverly. I started dedicating myself to charity work, volunteering long hours at a museum restoration project, a perfect excuse for late nights and frequent absences. Michael was thrilled. He loved that I was finally finding a fulfilling outlet that didn't involve him. He saw it as independent growth. I saw it as a solid alibi. My new mood was one of quiet, almost zen-like serenity. I cooked his favorite meals. I listened patiently to his work stress. and I offered thoughtful, generic advice. I was the perfect wife, the ideal backdrop. He misinterpreted my silence as healing. I knew it was the sound of a gun being silently loaded. I stopped fighting. I stopped questioning the Evelyn mentions. I let him talk about his decent deeds, his loyalties. I was gathering intelligence, measuring the exact length of the leash he thought he had on me. Every time he spoke about his commitment to Evelyn's past, he was unknowingly giving me permission to walk away from our future. One afternoon, I was staring at our wedding photo. My face, radiant with blind hope. Michael's face, slightly distracted, slightly earnest. The difference between us was that I was fully present in that moment, and he was already mentally reviewing the guest list for any missed connections to his old life. I realized that what I had with Michael wasn't love. It was a carefully managed portfolio. I was the safe blue-chip investment that ensured stability while he gambled his emotional capital on a high-risk nostalgic startup named Evelyn. The revenge could not be merely financial, though that was crucial. It had to be psychological. It had to be the realization that his safety, his anchor, his reliable constant, was capable of a complexity and calculation that surpassed his own business ruthlessness. He needed to regret losing me, the empowered woman, more than he regretted losing her, the memory. I spent hours with my lawyer, carefully constructing the legal framework for the divorce. My grandmother's trust, the tina.V Foundation, was activated. It was the financial firewall that would shield my inherited wealth, a sum that dwarfed his supposed loan to Evelyn, from the marital assets. He didn't know about the true value of my inheritance. He had always assumed I had only modest family money. His oversight was his weakness. I learned to live on two separate timelines: the present, where I was Michael's wife, and the future, where I was Tina, the independent architect of his downfall. The duality was exhausting, but exhilarating. One night, Michael was reading business reports in bed, utterly oblivious. I was reading a book on Renaissance strategy. I looked at him and thought, "You are about to be completely rewritten." The quiet withdrawal wasn't just about leaving. It was about creating a vacuum. A terrifying, absolute silence in his life that would, in time, become the loudest sound he had ever heard. And in that silence, I would strike. My time was coming. The time for silent observation was over. I had the why. Now I needed the how. A simple divorce settlement was inadequate. I needed something that mirrored his crime. A calculated long-term sacrifice of stability for a sentimental, fleeting gesture. My target was not his money, though I would take what was legally mine. My target was his reputation and, crucially, his partnership in the firm. His entire identity was wrapped up in being the successful, reliable pillar of California finance. I needed leverage that went beyond marital infidelity. I needed to expose his business hypocrisy, his willingness to compromise professional ethics for a personal obsession. The promissory note was the key. While the loan was technically personal, I suspected Michael had used the firm's administrative resources, or perhaps even subtle manipulations within joint accounts, to execute the transaction seamlessly and secretly. He was so focused on keeping the transaction hidden from me that he likely left clear trails within his own company's systems. I began discreet research into his firm's specific corporate governance and partnership agreements. I discovered a key clause. Any partner found to have used significant firm capital or resources for undisclosed personal investments, particularly those that create a conflict of interest or reflect negatively on financial stability, faces automatic partnership review and potential termination. Michael's $250,000 loan to his former flame, disguised and funded by liquidating a joint marital investment, absolutely constituted a conflict of interest, especially if Evelyn's new firm eventually required financial backing or legal maneuvering that Michael's firm might handle. But the real secret discovery came from Evelyn herself. Through anonymous networking, I found out that Evelyn's design firm was struggling, and Michael, desperate not to see his investment, both emotional and financial, fail, was preparing to offer a second, much larger financial injection. Not as a personal loan this time, but as an undisclosed, high-risk equity investment through a shell corporation he was setting up. This wasn't just unethical. This was a serious breach of fiduciary duty to his partners. This was the blueprint for his self-destruction, and I intended to finish the architecture. My revenge plan had 3 phases. The exit. Secure my assets already underway with the tina.V Foundation, and file for divorce without warning. The evidence drop. Use an untraceable source to deliver the promissory note, the evidence of the Shell Corporation planning, and the financial history to Michael's senior partners and his main competitor. The irony: ensure Michael's downfall is directly linked to his desperate loyalty to Evelyn, forcing him to realize the cost of his first love was his entire life. I arranged a meeting with my legal team for the following week. It would be my last act as Michael's wife, arranging the complete, silent obliteration of his professional life and personal security. I wanted him to regret the day he chose safety over respect. I wanted him to realize that the anchor he thought was solid was, in fact, an explosive device I was now ready to detonate. He came home that night, happy about a new acquisition. He even complimented me on my serene mood. "You're glowing, T," he said. "It's just the California air, Michael," I replied, raising my glass in a silent toast. To the detonation. The most effective form of sabotage isn't a bomb. It's a whisper. It's planting a tiny, inescapable seed of doubt that grows into a paralyzing fear. My first act wasn't the filing of the divorce papers that was the crescendo. The first act was targeted disruption. Michael had a huge, complex merger closing in 2 weeks. It was the crowning achievement of his year. If it went through, his reputation would be unassailable. His firm would expand exponentially. My timing had to be perfect. I needed to destabilize him just enough so that when the real blow landed, he wouldn't be able to recover his footing. I used my museum charity work as a cover to travel to San Francisco for a day. I wasn't restoring art. I was creating chaos. I visited a high-end corporate espionage contact, a former colleague who owed me a significant, undisclosed favor. My instruction was simple: access Michael's personal digital files, specifically his working notes on the merger, and make 3 subtle, untraceable changes. Not outright errors, but highly suspicious inconsistencies in the preliminary valuation models. The inconsistencies related to the property tax calculations in the acquired assets. They were plausible miscalculations, but significant enough to raise serious red flags if scrutinized by his meticulous senior partner James. The goal was not to tank the merger immediately, but to force Michael into a panic-driven, defensive posture. I wanted James, the partner who valued stability above all else, to doubt Michael's focus and reliability at the most critical moment. I returned to California late that night. Michael was already asleep. The next morning, he was irritable, glued to his laptop. "Damn it," I heard him mutter from the office. "The numbers are off. How could I miss something this basic?" I walked in, holding his coffee. "Work trouble, darling." He rubbed his eyes, stressed. "This merger. The valuation model seems to have a glitch. James noticed it immediately. Says I'm distracted. I've gone over these numbers 100 times. I placed the coffee on his desk. "Well, you've been working so hard lately. All the stress with Evelyn's mother, and your other responsibilities." I let the last word hang in the air, weighted with the unspoken knowledge of the promissory note. He flinched. Just a tiny, involuntary twitch around his jawline. It was the first sign that he understood I wasn't as blind as he assumed. He dismissed the feeling instantly, attributing my comment to typical wifely concern. But the seed was planted. He spent the next 48 hours completely consumed by damage control, desperately trying to prove his competency to James. He cancelled all personal appointments, including one I knew he had scheduled with Evelyn, to demonstrate his laser focus on the merger. The irony was delicious. In trying to prove he was dedicated to his firm and not distracted by his mistress's needs, he was, in fact, validating the very doubt I had manufactured. His frantic, stressed behavior only reinforced James's suspicion that Michael was losing his edge. This small act achieved everything. It diverted Michael's attention from our personal life, kept him away from Evelyn, thus creating distance and potential discord in that arrangement, and created the first serious crack in his professional armor. The silent power of calculated timing is absolute. He thought he was fixing a glitch. He was actually shoring up a wall I was about to collapse entirely. The filing for divorce was ready. My lawyer was on standby. All that was left was the final, non-negotiable step, the anonymous delivery of the proof. Before delivering the fatal blow, I needed to test Michael's emotional resilience and his commitment to his secret life. I needed to know how far he would prioritize Evelyn's phantom needs over my tangible presence. I created a minor emergency related to my grandmother's estate, a small legal complexity that required Michael's signature and immediate attention to secure a supposed minor dividend. I presented the papers to him on a Friday afternoon, citing an urgent deadline. The urgency was feigned. The truth was, I wanted to see if he would delay securing my, and by extension, our asset for Evelyn's sake. He glanced at the documents, already half out the door. Tina, I can't. Evelyn's design firm is having a launch party tonight. A huge networking opportunity. I promised her I'd be there to introduce her to some key clients. I'll look this over Sunday. He didn't just prioritize Evelyn's party over our financial security. He didn't even read the documents. He took my word that it was a minor dividend, demonstrating an absolute, arrogant confidence in my harmlessness. He saw my paperwork as a distraction, Evelyn's party as an obligation. I retrieved the papers, my hands steady. Of course. Michael. Go help Evelyn secure her future. I wouldn't want to interfere with your commitments. He barely noticed the sarcasm. He grabbed his coat, kissed me quickly, and was gone. He was rushing off to champion the dream he had funded for another woman. It was the moment I stopped hoping for regret and started demanding justice. The test was complete. Michael's hierarchy of values was concrete. Evelyn's desire is greater than Michael's pride is greater than Tina's stability. My next move had to hit all three targets. While he was celebrating Evelyn's struggling startup, I was executing phase 1, the exit. I electronically filed the divorce papers, having successfully moved the substantial inheritance into the protected trust. My lawyer was instructed to deliver the papers, along with a request for an immediate, protective restraining order on the marital assets, first thing Monday morning. That same Friday night, I went to a long-term rental apartment I had discreetly secured months ago. I took only 2 small suitcases. Everything else, the house, the cars, the luxury lifestyle, I left behind. The physical possessions were his problem now. I had salvaged the only thing that mattered, my agency. My final act before leaving the house was highly strategic. I went into his office and placed a single, anonymous, encrypted flash drive inside his rarely used personal ledger, the one he'd need for the merger closing. The drive contained 2 things, a complete, dated log of his communications with Evelyn, and a single, unwatermarked copy of the $250,000 promissory note. I didn't send it to his partners yet. I wanted him to find it first. I wanted him to spend a weekend knowing the gun was loaded and placed on the table, forcing him to confront the full scope of his deception before the external forces, the partners, the legal system, were unleashed. Leaving the house felt like stepping out of a suffocating costume. The California night was cool, the jasmine still sweet. But for the first time in years, the air tasted like freedom, cold and sharp. The game was no longer about winning him back. It was about proving to him that the most dangerous person in the room is the one who has already checked out, leaving only a ghost in their place. Monday morning dawned, bright and merciless. I was in my new, sterile, small apartment, sipping coffee, waiting for the first wave of shock to hit Michael. At 9 a.m., my lawyer emailed me, divorce papers served, temporary restraining order on assets granted. The safety net Michael had relied on, the marital wealth, was instantly immobilized. The first call came 10 minutes later. It was Michael. His voice was frantic, laced with disbelief and wounded vanity. Tina. What in God's name is this? A restraining order? Why are you doing this? We can talk. You can't just freeze everything. I let him rage for a full minute, listening with clinical detachment. When he paused, breathless, I spoke. My voice was low, steady, and utterly flat. I already have everything I need, Michael. You chose your past over your present, now you get to choose your consequence. This is about Evelyn, isn't it? Fine, I'll stop seeing her. I cut him off. It stopped being about Evelyn when I found the promissory note, and the planning for the Shell Corporation investment. That was fraud, Michael. That was a betrayal of our partnership. The silence on the line was instant, absolute. He had found the flash drive. The realization was hitting him. I knew everything. But the true revelation, the one that shattered his constructed reality, came later that afternoon. My lawyer called. Michael had already counterfiled, claiming I was suffering from mental instability, a classic, pathetic move to gain control of assets. But that wasn't the twist. I had instructed my corporate espionage contact to execute phase 2, the evidence drop, but I didn't send the proof to Michael's senior partners, James and Alan. I sent it to Evelyn's biggest financial backer and her largest competitor. I wanted Michael to suffer. Yes. But I realized that his greatest suffering would come from the realization that his sacrifice, the liquidation of our shared life, was utterly, tragically meaningless. I wanted Evelyn's dream, the very thing he risked everything for, to crumble because of his reckless support. The truth about the $250,000 loan was now in the hands of people who would view Evelyn as a high-risk, potentially fraudulent venture. They would pull their funding, not out of malice, but out of pure, pragmatic business logic. Michael spent the rest of the day in crisis, bouncing between his divorce lawyer and his merger team, who were now finding the fabricated inconsistencies in the valuation models impossible to explain. His professional world was spiraling, but he still thought he was managing a divorce. Then, the final, devastating call came in the evening. It wasn't Michael, it was Evelyn, hysterical. Her major investor had pulled out, citing undisclosed liabilities and risks associated with shadow funding. Her fledgling firm was dead on arrival. He ruined his life for her. I ruined her dream for him. Symmetry achieved. Michael was now standing alone, stripped of his wife, his safety, and the object of his obsession, all within a single day. The revenge wasn't loud. It was simply the sound of his entire foundation giving way. The beauty of quiet revenge is that the perpetrator remains unaware of the total damage until it's irreversible. Michael was preoccupied with the divorce and Evelyn's collapsing business. He hadn't yet grasped the third, and most lethal, pillar of my attack, his professional standing. The merger was set to close on Wednesday. That day was marked in my calendar as the point of no return. I had let Michael struggle for 2 days. Watching him frantically try to correct the fabricated accounting inconsistencies, I introduced the very inconsistencies that now made him look either incompetent or deliberately misleading to his partners. On Tuesday night, I executed the final phase of the evidence drop. This time, the package went directly and untraceably to the 2 senior partners, James and Alan, and to the opposing side of the merger deal. The package contained 3 items: the original signed promissory note for $250,000 to Evelyn, detailed internal memos proving Michael's manipulation of the merger valuation models, the glitch I manufactured, confirmation of the attempted setup of the shell corporation for high-risk, undisclosed investment in Evelyn's failing firm, a direct conflict of interest and breach of fiduciary trust. This information didn't just expose him as a bad husband. It exposed him as a partner who prioritized personal high-risk sentimentality over the financial security and ethical requirements of the firm. It turned him from a valuable asset into a catastrophic liability. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. I received a curt formal email from my lawyer on Wednesday morning. The merger was postponed indefinitely. Michael had been asked to take an immediate, indefinite administrative leave pending a full, internal review of his accounts and conduct. They didn't fire him immediately. They performed a surgical excision. They protected the firm first, freezing his access and isolating the contagion. His name, the source of his pride, was now a public relations risk. I imagined him sitting in his office, or perhaps his home, staring at the screen, the culmination of 2 decades of brilliant, ruthless ambition reduced to an administrative footnote. He had always defined himself by his success, his power, his control. All of it was gone, instantly, because of the paper trail he left funding a relationship that was never meant to be. The true turning point wasn't the filing of the divorce. It was the moment James, his mentor, signed the administrative leave papers. Michael was stripped of his profession, and without his title, without his firm, he was nothing but a wistful man with a large, empty house in the California hills. He called me again that evening. His voice was no longer arrogant or angry. It was thin, reedy, utterly lost. "Tina, my life is gone," he whispered. "The firm. They know everything. How could you do this?" "You did this, Michael," I replied, still detached. "You introduced the risk. I simply exposed the liability. You taught me that you valued loyalty and decency so highly that you would betray your marriage for them. I taught you that loyalty and decency are meaningless if they are not applied where they are earned." I hung up before he could respond. There was nothing left to say. The execution was flawless. The turning point was complete. He was left with exactly what he prioritized: the wreckage of Evelyn's dream, and the total destruction of his own stability. Once the professional guillotine falls, the personal dominoes follow swiftly. Michael's sudden, unexplained administrative leave in the middle of a massive merger was a front-page story in the regional business press. Reputation is everything in California finance, and his was now stained irrevocably. The first domino was Evelyn. When her angel investors fled, she reached out to Michael for help. She saw him not as the great love, but as the bottomless source of funds. When she learned of the firm's investigation and the freezing of his assets and realized that the $250,000 loan was the root cause of his demise, her love evaporated. She confronted him, not with compassion, but with desperate anger. The ghost, when forced to deal with the reality of financial ruin, turned out to be just as demanding and self-centered as any ordinary person. Michael's fantasy shattered. Evelyn realized her savior was broken. Michael realized his poetry was just a desperate plea for cash. The second domino was the house. With the marital assets frozen and Michael's primary source of income suspended, the large mortgage payment became immediately problematic. The safe, golden cage I had escaped was now a very expensive, very unstable liability. My lawyer used the opportunity to apply for temporary alimony and legal fees, ensuring Michael was forced to liquidate personal assets, cars, art, stocks to meet the immediate costs. The irony: he was forced to spend his remaining personal capital to fund my successful divorce from him. The final, and most satisfying, domino was the loss of his social circle. James and Alan, the senior partners, were Michael's closest friends. They didn't just cut him off professionally, they cut him off entirely. Lunches were cancelled, calls went unanswered. They saw him as a threat, a failure, and a reminder of their own corporate vulnerability. He was alone. The man who valued loyalty above all else, who sacrificed his wife for a phantom loyalty to a past lover, found himself utterly devoid of genuine loyalty when he needed it most. I saw photos of him in the society pages, thin, unshaven, looking haunted, still wearing the expensive suits that now fit him poorly. He was a parody of the powerful man he once was. He was learning, in the cruelest way possible, that I wasn't just safety. I was the keystone of his entire structure. Remove the keystone, and the entire arch collapses. I was living quietly in my small, secure apartment, focusing on my foundation's work. I was free. He was wealthy yet trapped. The difference was agency. He was now subject to the consequence of his own poor judgment, while I was charting my new, quiet, empowered path. I wasn't done though. There was one final piece of the puzzle. I had to see the moment of pure, unadulterated regret in his eyes. I needed the final, personal confrontation to close the chapter entirely. The legal proceedings were moving swiftly. Michael, distracted and demoralized, was fighting a losing battle, but he insisted on one final mediation session before finalizing the settlement. It was scheduled for a neutral, sterile conference room in a downtown legal complex. I knew it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about his need for validation. His desperate, final attempt to understand how the safe, predictable Tina had orchestrated his total ruin. I walked into the room wearing a simple, impeccably tailored black dress. No jewelry, no dramatic flair. I was radiating quiet, unassailable power. Michael was already there, slumped, looking 10 years older than the last time I saw him. The lawyers handled the formalities. The discussion quickly descended into the personal. "Look at me, Tina," he demanded, his voice hoarse. "Look what you've done. I've lost the firm. I've lost the house. Evelyn, she left. Of course. You destroyed everything." I met his gaze. It was the first time I had looked at him without the filter of love or anger, just pure, cold assessment. "I exposed what you had already built, Michael," I said, my voice steady. "You built a life based on the lie that I was disposable. You liquidated our marital safety net for a romantic ghost. You defined loyalty as an obligation to a former lover, and decency as a debt you owed to everyone but your wife. I gave you the gift of consequence. You regretted losing Evelyn, the past. Now you will spend the rest of your life regretting losing me, the present, the future, the stability you valued and then abandoned." He recoiled, not from my words but from the realization of my total composure. He realized the woman before him was not the heartbroken wife. She was the judge and jury. "Why the firm?" he pleaded. "Why my life's work? You took everything. Because your life's work was the mask, Michael. You are obsessed with appearances. You used the firm's reputation and our money to keep Evelyn's fantasy alive. I simply removed the mask. Your mistake was believing that the safety me would never become the agent of chaos. You chose sentimentality over business sense, and in the end, both failed you. In that moment, I saw it, the look of utter, total regret. Not just for the loss of his money, or his house, but for the profound tactical error he had made in underestimating me. He saw not just Tina, his former wife, but the living, breathing manifestation of fate. He didn't argue again. He signed the papers, the divorce was finalized. I had extracted myself, secured my financial independence, and ensured his regret was proportional to his betrayal. The confrontation wasn't cathartic. It was simply the final, necessary closing entry in a cold ledger. I walked out of that room a free woman, leaving Michael alone with the bitter reflection of his own destructive choices. Michael thought the final confrontation was the end of my plan. He believed, even in his ruin, that the destruction of his professional life was my ultimate goal. He was wrong. The destruction was just the cleanup. The final twist was the assertion of my future, built on the very foundation he ignored. A month after the divorce, I received a call from James, Michael's former senior partner. The internal investigation into Michael's conduct, triggered by the anonymous evidence drop, had concluded. They had secured the merger, but Michael's sudden departure had left a massive, complex vacuum in the firm's executive structure. James was formal, cold, and strictly professional. He admitted the firm had been blindsided, but lauded the surgical precision of the evidence they had received. He confessed that they needed a partner with meticulous focus, deep knowledge of Michael's accounts, and, crucially, absolute discretion and stability. He offered me a consulting position initially, moving into a senior executive role within the year. Not as a partner yet, but as a highly compensated director of compliance and strategy. My compensation package was staggering. I didn't immediately accept. I let the silence hang, forcing James to truly value the stability I brought. James, I said, you removed Michael because he introduced uncontrolled risk for a sentimental attachment. I demonstrated that I am capable of both calculating and neutralizing risk, but I want full autonomy over the compliance structure. And I want a significant stake in the new fund acquisition Michael was managing. He agreed. He didn't care about the terms. He cared about stopping the bleeding and securing a replacement anchor. The final, climactic shift was this. I did not just leave Michael's life. I took over his position. I was stepping into the firm, the structure, the very ecosystem that had defined his power, replacing him not with a memory, but with a living, calculating force. I was the safety he discarded, now transformed into the power he coveted. The irony was devastating. He spent years proving his loyalty to Evelyn, the poetry, and I walked into his boardroom, seizing his legacy as the ultimate pragmatic prize. 3 hours 15 minutes and 50 seconds. My first official act, once my contract was signed, was securing the firm's investment in my grandmother's trust, the Tina V. Foundation, turning it from a simple inheritance into a sophisticated, protected investment vehicle. The trust was now intertwined with the very success of Michael's old firm. He had left everything behind for Evelyn, and now my quiet, calculated wealth was literally powering his former empire. 3 hours, 17 minutes. I never told Michael. He would only learn of my new role through the inevitable rumors and the subtle, sharp changes in the firm's compliance procedures that now bore my signature. My victory wasn't just my freedom. It was my total, silent infiltration of his identity. 3 hours 18 minutes. Reflect. The man who slighted me for a ghost found his life taken over by the woman he thought was too safe to be a threat. The cage was broken, and I hadn't just escaped, I had moved into the warden's office. The transition was seamless. My quiet power grew daily, fueled by competence, focus, and the complete absence of romantic distraction. I moved into a sleek, minimalist high-rise apartment with a panoramic view of the Pacific, a view I had earned entirely on my own terms. I rarely thought of Michael or Evelyn. They were residual noise, the necessary casualties of a larger campaign. My world was defined by strategic mergers, risk assessment, and the quiet, undeniable weight of professional influence. The news of Michael's descent filtered back through the firm. He had failed to find comparable work. His reputation, linked to the public scandals surrounding the cancelled merger, preceded him. He ended up taking a low-level consultant job outside of California, a shadow of his former self. I heard that Evelyn had left California entirely, moving back east to live with family, her entrepreneurial dream completely extinguished. They were separated not by distance, but by the collapse of the fragile fantasy they both tried to force into existence. I had achieved a state of complete emotional neutrality regarding them. I hadn't sought continued pain or contact. I had sought closure and agency, and I found both in the deliberate construction of my new foundation. My new life wasn't about love, not yet. It was about power, the quiet, internal power that comes from knowing you are capable of weathering any storm, and capable of orchestrating your own destiny. I used the inherited wealth, the protected Tina V Foundation, and my new executive role to launch several philanthropic initiatives focused on female entrepreneurship and financial literacy. I was building a legacy of empowerment, using the very tools Michael thought only belonged to him. One afternoon, James mentioned Michael's name, a fleeting reference to a document that needed filing. He paused, seeing the look on my face, not anger but pure, businesslike indifference. "You never talk about him, Tina," James observed. "There's nothing to talk about, James," I replied, signing a multi-million-dollar acquisition paper. "He is a closed chapter." I don't look backward. I look at the balance sheet. That was the truth. My triumph wasn't the revenge itself, but the fact that the revenge had ceased to be the central motivation for my life. It was merely the catalyst that launched me into a realm of genuine power. I didn't need him to suffer constantly. I just needed him to be irrelevant. And he was. Time is the final judge of all emotional scores. Years passed. The high-rise apartment, the executive title, the secure financial future, it all became my unremarkable normal. I was thriving. I sometimes look at the Pacific from my window, the same coastline where Michael and I stood on our wedding day. The diamonds still sparkle on the water, but the meaning has changed entirely. They no longer reflect a shared, fragile hope but my solitary, solid achievement. The ultimate moral of the story isn't that revenge is sweet. It's that agency is essential. Michael slighted me because he saw me as a convenience, a predictable element of his environment. He believed my strength was my tolerance. I proved that my strength was my capacity for calculated action. My victory was not measured in his ruin, but in the quiet, empowered life I built in its wake. He became the cautionary tale, the man who lost everything due to a sentimental error. I became the quiet force, the woman who turned betrayal into billions. I am Tina. I was heartbroken, yes. But heartbreak is temporary. Calculated power is eternal. I learned that the greatest betrayal is not inflicted by others, but the betrayal of one's own worth by accepting less than you deserve. I am safe now. Not because I have a husband or a house, but because I am my own safe haven. I am the anchor, the storm, and the entire harbor. Michael chose a ghost. I chose silence, strategy, and self-preservation. And in the end, I won the only prize worth having, myself. You've watched 4 hours of calculated revenge. You've seen the price of underestimation. Now ask yourself, if you were Tina, would you have the courage to walk away and build this kind of silent power? If this story resonated, if it scared you, if it empowered you, you know what to do. Subscribe now and join this silent army. If you still choose not to, go ahead, comment why. Tell me what piece of your safety you're afraid of losing by acknowledging this truth. The story is over. My life has just begun.